Welcome to our first AARP Arizona podcast, where we talk about the issues that matter most to older adults and their families. I'm Dana Marie Kennedy, and today we're diving into a powerful conversation honoring the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., celebrating Black History Month and exploring why financial security is such an important part of that story. Dr. King's dream wasn't just about civil rights, it was also about economic justice. And he believed that dignity and equality included access to opportunity, fair wages, and financial stability. And as we reflect on his vision during Black History Month, we'll talk about how financial empowerment continues to shape lives today. We're fortunate to have Dr. Whitaker on our AARP Arizona podcast. Dr. Whitaker is the executive director of the George Washington Carver Museum and Cultural Center, located in Phoenix, which highlights African American heritage through arts, culture, and historical exhibits, and named after the famous botanist and inventor. When we think of Dr. King, we often remember his speech about freedom and equality, but he also spoke passionately about economic justice. In fact, his Poor People's Campaign was all about lifting families out of poverty and creating pathways to opportunities. So, Dr. Whitaker, let's start with this question. Why do you think economic justice was such a critical part of Dr. King's vision?
Well, he once said that it's one thing to be able to have access to a restaurant or a diner, to be able to buy a hamburger. It's something else to be able to afford the hamburger once you have access to get in there, right? So he said, a lot of the protests that they had been involved in between the early 1950s and the late 1960s was targeted towards access, right? Just access, equal and fair and unfettered access. But what he said we didn't think about enough, he realized this towards the end of his leadership, was that if folks don't have money, they don't have capital, access isn't enough. They actually in some ways do not have access. They have access on paper, but they don't have the wherewithal and the means to be able to take advantage of it.
Fascinating. And when you look at today's world, how do you see that vision reflected or maybe still unfulfilled in conversations about financial security for older adults?
I think that we are still dealing with the ramifications of folks not realizing how important that is, right? I would remind folks that the March on Washington's original name was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, right? And folks tend to forget the jobs and freedom part. One of the things that Martin Luther King and his contemporaries argued was that there is no freedom without economic viability and freedom, right? Economic freedom and stability gives you choices. He went so far as to argue that the United States could not continue to aspire to be a democratic nation while so many of its citizens struggled for basic necessities or hovered around or below the poverty line, particularly the most vulnerable. He often talked about older Americans, senior Americans, and younger Americans, right? He often talked about that. We have those that have paved the way, who in our case have more often than not paid into the system, who we should value, who we should listen to, who we should step to and study at, their what's the word that I'm looking for? Study at their knees, just kind of get in front of them and learn about what they went through. And we won't be able to do that if they are living in a situation where they do not have health care. They can't maintain a healthy diet. They're struggling to buy food. They're struggling to pay for rent. I think it's not an accident that I believe one of or the founder of AARP was a former educator or a teacher, right? My mother taught for 37 years, right? And we didn't have much of anything. And had she not put some money away and had she not had Social Security and organizations like AARP to help her, she wouldn't be able to live to the degree that she's comfortable today. So we're still dealing with a lot of those issues. And I think a lot of it has to do with folks not understanding the way that economics and democracy work. You in order to have an unfettered and effective democracy or experiment democracy, you also have to have economic literacy and financial freedom.
You're right. That's such an important point. And financial security isn't just about money, it's also about independence, dignity, and the ability to live on your own terms. So, Black History Month is a time to honor the contributions and struggles of African Americans throughout history. It's also a time to look forward and think about how we can close gaps that still exist, especially when it comes to wealth and retirement security. Studies show that African American retirees often face significant challenges: lower lifetime earnings, less access to employment sponsored retirement plans, and systemic barriers that have persisted for generations. So, Dr. Whitaker, here's a question. Why is Black History Month an important time to talk about empowerment for older adults?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think one of the things that Black History Month can teach us when we are taking advantage of it, using those 28 days to learn more about African American history, is the fact that we have lots of examples of folks in the face of unspeakable horror and mistreatment who did find a way to not only subsist but to take care of themselves and help subsidize a community and a movement. It wasn't easy, right? But they did. And one of the things that helps us understand that one of the things that'll help us do is develop our own, financial literacy, right? So Black History
Hmm.
Month helps us learn about the power of collectivism, pooling one's resources, right? The entire civil rights movement was funded basically by the pennies, nickels, dimes, and random $1 bills of laborers, domestic laborers, field laborers, right? But they pooled their money together, prioritized that, and they were able to fund the civil rights movement. They were also able to fund and support and benefit from institutions in their own community. Black History Month tells us about that. It also tells us that when we actually are treated as equal citizens and don't have extra legal behavior, illegal behavior undermining our upward mobility, we can do remarkable things. Black History Month tells us about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, which was one of the most economically dynamic areas in the country. Black folks were killing it in Tulsa on Black Wall
Hmm.
Street. Um, Same with PT County in Maryland. There's same with Jefferson Street in Phoenix, Arizona. There were communities of folks that were starting businesses. Those businesses were in turn giving back to the community to help fight the early civil rights movement. So there was this symbiotic relationship between culture, understanding, economic viability, and protest. And imagine if most African Americans would not have simply been trying to, navigate which bathroom that they could, go to, or which water fountain they could go to. Imagine if all of those barriers had not existed, where we would be now. The fact that many of us are doing as well as we are right now is a true testament to how powerfully committed those folks were to economic viability. And I'll end this by saying, in my first book, the person that I studied, or persons, one of them was Lincoln Ragsdale Sr., one of the most dynamic civil rights leaders in the United States, certainly in Arizona and the greater Southwest. And at the end of his life, somebody asked him, "What would you do differently as a civil rights leader?" And he said, we understood it, but we really didn't understand to the extent that we should have the power of economics. And if we would have done that, we would have shifted a little bit. That's why you see King in 1966, 67, and 68 start to shift his focus on economic equality, right? And that's why he was in Memphis when he was shot. He was advocating for sanitation workers. So this is really, really, really important. And for people like my grandmother, who died at just before she was 94 years old, she was a housekeeper her entire life. She did not get, she was an African American woman. So, as a
Hmm.
consequence, most of the people that she worked for throughout her life did not pay taxes on her labor. So, when she, quote unquote, retired, she didn't have the type of retirement that many of her white peers had. And so, she did not have the sort of stability and comfort that you would think that somebody would have after working for, I think she started working at 14 or 15 years old. She was born
Uh-huh.
before child labor laws. right?
Wow.
So I think of my grandmother and other people like that who deserve much better than that when they reach that age.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's an interesting perspective. Um, so now let's get practical. Financial security can feel overwhelming, but there are steps everyone can take starting today. So, Dr. Whitaker, what are some of the biggest challenges you see for older adults when it comes to financial security?
I still think even for older adults, I would say financial literacy is imperative.
Hmm.
And understanding all the tools that are available to them.
Hmm.
Uh, my elders put money under their pillow. Sometimes they would put it, in a bank account. Um, I wish my grandmother would have realized that at a certain dollar level in her savings account, she could have put that in a higher yielding account, right?
Right.
It's things like this that a lot of folks don't understand. Understanding the tax code and the way in which it interacts with economic opportunities that might ease your tax burden a bit, I think would help. Being very targeted in one's spending, I think, is important as well. Where are there benefits for you as well? One of the things that AARP provides is all sorts of benefits. So, one of the things that my mother did is I think she got a sort of quasi PhD in AARP benefits once she joined AARP to find out all of the, because those things add up, right? I think those things are really important. So, understanding that even when you are older, if you have limited resources, those resources can still work for you a bit if you
Hmm.
have the right knowledge. Seeking out a good financial advisor, I think, is important. Many will give you, just like an attorney, a free consultation just to talk to them about, where they are and what you might want to do. So I think those things are important for older adults. I think they're important for everybody, but I think there's sometimes people assume that once you're older, that there aren't learning tools for you to be able to with that particularly since we're living longer now, right? So people
Right.
have to make whatever they have last a lot longer than used to be.
Right. Right. And are do you have any thoughts on scams that people should avoid? Um, do you guys do any
Uh,
education on some scams or anything?
you know what? We have not here at Carver, but we should because it really is an epidemic. My oldest son went to the Philippines a couple of years ago, and my mother was scammed. Someone called her pretending to be him. They used AI to record his voice on social media, and they got her information basically by scouring his social media account. And so she
Hmm.
panicked, thinking that he was in jail in the Philippines and was already preparing to withdraw money out of her account to quote unquote get him out of jail. Well, of course, he was sleeping soundly with his host family in the Philippines. He was not in jail. It was a scammer who targeted that particular age group of folks. So I think being very wary, learning how to screen your phone calls, learning the
Hmm.
telltale signs about sharing your information with folks. I think those things are really important. Understanding how often it happens, even here at the Museum and Cultural Center, sometimes our general number is flooded with spam calls or attempted fraud calls. So you have to be, one of the things I think people have to understand is how ubiquitous this is and how
Yeah.
vigilant you have to be. It's
Yeah.
almost every time now.
Yeah. We have a whole fraud watch network, and what we find is sometimes people are afraid to even tell anybody because they're embarrassed. And
Yeah.
I think it's so important to realize that it really can happen to anybody. And although they prey on older people, just like you mentioned, it can also happen to younger people as well.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, ARP has a lot of resources for those. And so you just gave some great tips. And for anyone listening, AARP has incredible resources from retirement calculators to fraud prevention guides to help you plan and protect your finances. And you can go to aarp.org/money for more details. And are there any tips or anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to cover?
Oh, I can't think of anything. What I would say is a lot of older Americans are generally more generous when it comes to giving and donation and philanthropy, no matter how much money they have. And so I would make sure that they understand the tax benefits of some of the organizations they give to, as
Mhm.
well, because many of them, there's dollar matching. Depending upon when you file, you might get some of that right back if you donate in late December, right after January. It's figuring things out like that are really important because every dollar counts, and whatever you can get back, I think, will help.
Right, right. Yeah, we have all kinds of tips on saving money as well. Some of those, some of
Hmm.
those things that your grandmother might have been reading when she was alive.
Oh yeah, she used to say, I think it was an Andrew Carnegie quote. She would say, "Mind the pennies and the pounds will take care of themselves."
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that we're about to wrap up. So let's remember Dr. King's words of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And economic justice is part of that vision. Financial security gives us freedom, dignity, and a peace of mind. Anything that we didn't cover that you would like to cover before we wrap up, Dr. Whitaker?
No, I would just thank you for the opportunity. And I would say one last thing about a quote that Martin Luther King shared with us, right? He said, "We're basically all in this together. We will either survive together in the beloved community, or we will all perish as fools." And I'm paraphrasing that, of course. And so I just want to remind folks that's one of the lasting legacies of Dr. Martin Luther King is emphasizing the fact that we're all in this together
We
and
certainly.
yeah, assisting each other to the degree that we can, whether it's democratic movements or economic literacy and security. We're all here in it together.
I know AARP is going to be partnering with you guys, and so we look forward to that. But I really want to thank Dr. Whitaker for taking your time from your busy schedule to join us today. And to all those watching or listening to our first podcast, we thank you for joining us today and hope you join us again next month. For financial resources, visit aarp.org/money. To find out about our events, please visit aarp.org/AZ. And let's keep this conversation going, not just during Black History Month, but all year long. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and take care. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye bye.